All right, today we're jumping into a really wild thought experiment from researcher Peter Duke's Substack called The First NPC President. Now, it digs into this strange intersection of technology, media, and raw political power. And even though the story it lays out feels like something straight out of science fiction, it's actually designed to explain something very, very real about the world we live in right now.
So, let's start with the central puzzle that Duke's work is trying to solve. You ever see a political leader make some big, bold statement, and then just a few days, maybe even a few hours later, they completely walk it back? Well, according to this thought experiment, that kind of erratic behavior, it might not be erratic at all. It might actually be following a hidden, data-driven logic. Okay, so this is the core idea. It's called the NPC hypothesis. And yeah, NPC, just like in video games, a non-player character. It imagines a president whose decisions aren't really driven by their own beliefs or some grand strategy. Instead, their actions are basically boxed in by a constant real-time fire hose of public sentiment data. It's like they're not a leader anymore, just an operator of an interface.
So to understand how we could ever get to a place like that, Duke's thought experiment cooks up this fictional backstory. And like so many of these stories about power and tech, it all starts in the heart of the Cold War. The objective? Something they called public sentiment stabilization.
Now, what's so wild here is the language they use. This is a quote from a fictional 1959 government directive. And listen to how it frames the problem. It treats public belief not as a political thing, but as a national security issue. Suddenly, managing what people think and feel, well, that becomes a matter of strategic defense.
And this is where the fiction gets, well, weirdly real. Duke places actual historical figures right at the center of this fictional project. You've got Lawrence Gise, who really did work for ARPA, and, get this, was Jeff Bezos' grandfather. Then you have Dr. John G. Trump, a brilliant MIT professor and, yep, the uncle of Donald Trump. Duke uses these real-world connections to hint at this pattern, this deep link between technological power and political dynasties.
Okay, so the story builds from there. We fast forward into the 1970s, and that abstract idea of stabilizing public sentiment starts to get engineered into an actual functional system, a prototype.
In the story, it's called Project Ordo. That stands for Operational Research in Directed Opinion. And the whole approach was basically cybernetics. It treated a leader's speech not as a one-way street, but as an input into a giant system. The public's reaction was the output, and that output was then measured to correct the next input. It's a closed loop.
So here's how this crazy loop is supposed to have worked. A politician gives a speech. The Ordo system instantly measures the public's emotional response through polls, phone banks, whatever data it can get. And then an operator's console spits out linguistic corrections. Use these words, change your tone, all to steer public feeling back to where they want it to be. It's not communication anymore, it's regulation.
And get this. This is a table from a fictional 1977 Ordo report created for the thought experiment. It's absolutely chilling how it seems to predict the future. The 80s? Distributed computing. The 90s? Online communities, or what we call forums. The 2000s? The entire web becomes a tool for real-time emotional telemetry. It's as if they saw every new technology not as a tool for connection, but as a more powerful way to harvest emotional data and make their feedback loop faster and faster.
So how does a top-secret technology like this break out into the open? Well, in Duke's narrative, the perfect test lab wasn't some secret government facility. It was something watched by millions of us, right in our living rooms. Primetime reality TV.
So, according to this hypothesis, the main goals of Project Ordo were basically product-tested as reality shows. You need to model how groups behave under pressure? Boom, you get Survivor. You want to study how an executive makes decisions when everyone's judging them? You create The Apprentice. And you need to perfect real-time sentiment analysis using mass phone voting? Well, that's literally the entire premise of America's Got Talent.
So the key takeaway here is that in this fictional world, these weren't just TV shows. They were massive behavioral simulations. You know, the contestants were the guinea pigs, sure, but the real experiment was being run on the audience at home. Every phone vote, every online comment, that was all just data, being fed back in to refine the algorithms that could predict and manage our emotions on a gigantic scale.
And all of this brings us right up to the present day, the culmination of this whole thought experiment, the final evolution of this system, a tool that, in this story, creates the perfect conditions for the non-player character president.
It's called AbChow, Think of it as the direct descendant of that old Ordo console from the 70s, but absolutely supercharged for the social media age. It plugs directly into everything: Twitter, Facebook, real-time polling, news analysis, and it digests it all into a single, continuous stream of advice for a leader.
So, how's it work? Well, imagine a screen that doesn't just show you approval ratings. It shows you a list of things to say or tweet. And right next to each option is a prediction. This phrase will boost approval by 2% with suburban women, but create 5% more online anger. The leader's job isn't to decide what to do anymore. It's just to pick the message from the menu that gives the most stable outcome.
And this, right here, is the real punchline from Duke's report. When your every word is optimized by a predictive algorithm, authenticity just becomes another number to manage. Governance is no longer about leading. It's about playing the game of public perception, one optimized tweet at a time.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. Why does any of this matter? Why go through this elaborate fictional history? Because it's not really a story about technology. It's a hypothesis about the true nature of power in our modern world.
See, at the absolute heart of Duke's work is this thing he calls the Silver Strand Hypothesis. And the idea is pretty simple. Over the last century, what power is has fundamentally changed. It's moved away from controlling material things, like armies and oil, and toward managing perception itself. In this world, real power is about controlling what people know, what they believe, and what they feel. Which, of course, brings us to the final and most unsettling question this whole thought experiment leaves us with. If a leader's actions are just guided by an interface that's designed to keep public opinion stable, if they're simply picking from a menu of algorithmically approved choices, then who or what is actually in charge? Who governs the governors?